Hello everyone, welcome back to Scarecrow Joe's studio. I know it's been almost a month since the last tutorial, but I have a good one for you. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a 3D spooky Halloween bookshelf portal. Something like this. I cover everything from start to finish in this one tutorial, so it is kind of a long one. So, without further ado, let's get going. All right, this is going to be fun. But the first step, you want to find a image for the focal piece of your project here, and you're going to want to print that out. So in my case here, I found this really cool looking image. It's got like a little haunted house looking thing in the background. It has like a stone walkway going up to that house on the hill there. Some little tombstones. Full moon in the background and some little tree limbs coming out on the sides. So this is what I'm going to use. Now, depending on the size of the image that you find, you may have to reduce it so that, or scale it down or reduce the size of the image so that it will fit your project. In my case, I reduced the original photo that I found by 50%, and this particular photo here, after reducing it, is approximately, I'm going to say, a little over 6 inches long or tall, and then a little over close to 3 3/4 inches wide. So that's going to be the perfect size for my project, and you're going to want to print 2 of these out. I printed one of them out on like a heavier kind of a cardstock paper, and this is just regular size, what is it, 8 by 11 or something like that, regular size paper. And then I also printed out another one just on regular printer paper, not cardstock. I printed another one out. You're going to need 2, so that's what I suggest that you do. Print the one out that you're actually going to end up using for the focal piece in the background of your project, and then one that you're going to be using for different things for reference and for cutting and sizing the one that you're going to be using. I hope that makes sense. All right, for now we're going to set these aside, and we're going to move on to actually creating what we're going to need for the frame of our project here. The size of the cardboard that I've cut here is 10 inches long by approximately 8 inches wide. And then I cut out 4 of them. So you're going to need to cut out 4 of whatever size that you're making for your piece. Then you're going to need to cut out a few more pieces of cardboard. So you also want to determine how deep you want your photo in the background to be. So what I have done is for the top and the bottom of my structure here, I've cut out 2 pieces of corrugated cardboard that are the same width of these 4 pieces, which is approximately 8 inches wide here, or long on the bottom and the top. And then on my pieces of cardboard, I cut them out to about 2 inches wide. Now, if you want your project to be deeper, cut these out so that they're wider. So maybe 3 inches, 4 inches, whatever you want. But I'm going to go with 2 for this project. In addition to that, you're going to want 2 more pieces of corrugated cardboard cut to the same length as your 4 pieces here. So in this case, again, 10 inches long. And then you want them to match your bottom and your top pieces, so I did 2 inches wide. So this way I have 2 side pieces, and then 1 for each side, and then I have a top piece and a bottom piece. So the next step, what we're going to do is on the photo that we printed out on the cardstock, we're going to go ahead and cut that out of the cardstock. So I have that cut out. I'm going to set it aside for a moment. And I'm going to take an additional piece of my cardstock. I want to place it underneath my corrugated cardboard here. And I want to cut off any of the excess pieces. So I'm just going to trace around here. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut those excess pieces off. All right, I have that piece trimmed down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this to one of my pieces of the 10 by 8 corrugated cardboards that I've cut out. And I'm going to use Mod Podge. If you don't have Mod Podge, any white glue is going to work for this. You don't need to go out and buy Mod Podge. So I'm going to use a chip brush, paintbrush. So I'm going to apply some Mod Podge to the entire piece of corrugated cardboard here. Now that I've applied that to that piece of cardboard, I'm going to take the cardstock that I trimmed down and I'm going to glue it onto that cardboard. Now the sole purpose of doing this step is because I'm also going to Mod Podge and attach my printout here of my picture that I'm going to use to this as well. But I have found that if I just glued that right onto one of the pieces of a cardboard underneath this, even though it's on a thicker piece of cardstock, you could still see the corrugation of the cardboard actually coming through in your photo. So by applying another sheet onto the piece of cardboard, it prevents that from happening. So for this next step, I'm going to take a little bit more of my Mod Podge and right in the center. I don't need to put glue on the entire thing. I just need to have enough glue on there to glue on my photo. So I'm going to take my photo, and if you want to be real precise, go ahead and measure this out, but I'm going to eyeball it. And let's see here. That looks like it's right about in the middle to me. So that's where I'm going to glue it. So kind of press down around on top and around the edges of your printout so that you make sure that it's not going to raise off of the cardboard here, the cardstock. That's pretty good. Now you don't need to wait for this to dry for this next step. So I'm going to take more of my Mod Podge on this paintbrush and I'm going to go right over the photo. And this is the reason why you want to use a white glue that dries clear. Mod Podge, it works really well for that. There are other white glues that dry clear. Pretty much all white glues, I think, dry clear. If you're not sure about the glue that you're using, I would maybe print out an extra one and test it. You will get a little bit of bleeding from the ink on your printout when you printed it, so you could see where there's a light amount of the coloration that came off. I don't worry about it. It's going to dry. It's going to be fine. So I'm done with this right now. I'm going to set this aside to dry completely. All right, before we move on to the next step, I just wanted to show you. It's only been about, 15 minutes or so, and this is already starting to dry. Still tacky, of course, but it is starting to dry. And if you see that maybe some of your edges are starting to lift, you could either, you could apply a little bit more of the Mod Podge on those areas. But honestly, your edges, they're not going to show, okay? We're going to have the cardboard and our other pieces that we're going to sculpt in are going to come right up to these edges and kind of cover a little bit of the edges. So in the end result, it's not going to matter if you have a little bit of areas that are not completely glued down. Don't stress over that whatsoever. All right. So in the next step, we're going to go back. We're going to leave that other piece there to dry because we're not going to be using that one for a bit. So by the time we get to it, it's going to be completely dry and we can handle it and do what we need to do. But for this next step, we're going to go ahead and take that other printout on regular printer paper. And what I want to do is I'm going to take another thin piece of regular printer paper. I'm going to take that sheet of printer paper. I'm going to place it right over the top. And hopefully you could see where I could trace around it, where the photo underneath that thin piece of printer paper comes through. So I'm going to go ahead and trace around the whole thing. This is not cardstock that I'm doing this on, because I don't need it to be cardstock. This is just regular printer paper. I'm just tracing around the outline of the photo. All right, now here's where you have a decision to make. Do you want your frame to have an arch at the top, or do you want it to be a rectangle like this? I think it's a little bit more interesting if it's arched. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my pen, and just at the top, I'm just going to make an arch. So something like that. Now I'm going to use this as my template here to cut out these areas onto those pieces of corrugated cardboard. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out what's going to serve as the template for that. And you're probably going to be a little bit more precise on your angles if you're curving your angles. I mean, I always have issues with that. If you have like a protractor or something like that, you want to get real precise, go ahead and use that. I just eyeball stuff mostly, and still turns out okay. So whatever you guys feel like doing. I want to find the center here. And I'm going to trace out my template. Hopefully you can see that, but I have traced out that onto that piece of corrugated cardboard. My reference here that I used that to create the template, I'm going to go ahead and cut that out now. So I have that cut out. I'm going to place it right on top of where I drew and traced around that other piece of paper there. Kind of line it up. And I want to put the template on top of it. And I'm just going to take my pen and trace around those areas here. Take my photo. It's really hard to see, but I can see it where I traced around those areas there. Because I want to make sure that this is gonna line up correctly. You trim a little bit here, a little bit around there. Doesn't have to be perfect, because like I said, those edges are going to be covered. So that's pretty close. So I know that that is going to fit. That's going to fit. So because this is going to be the back, the very back of our piece. So I want to make sure by looking at it, when I cut out my entrances or my doorways, that's going to fit, and it will. So that's perfect. This is great. Now I could set that aside, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, just this area here inside this piece of cardboard. All right, that's cut out of there. Okay, we're going to set this piece aside, and we're going to get our third piece of the corrugated cardboard. Again, in my case, 10 by 8. Now remember, I had you cut out 4 pieces. One piece we glued on the background photo. One piece we cut out the initial opening. And then this third piece, we're going to cut out another opening. But this time, after centering it on there, and I want to make sure it's kind of centered, so let's see here. So after centering that piece on there, this time what I want to do is I don't want to trace directly around it onto this piece of cardboard. I want to make this opening a little bit bigger. So maybe by an inch or to a half an inch. So I'm going to say I'm going to go out to about right here. Probably easier if I use my ruler. So this way our opening for our little portal is going to be staggered. So I'm just going to make a mark there on that side. Come down a little bit. Come over here. I'm not measuring. I'm just using the ruler as a guide here. But, I mean, you can measure. So I'm going to come all the way down again. Down here. And then I want a little bit of room down at the bottom. So let me extend this line. I want to just extend that line just a little bit. And then again, I'm going to take my ruler, make my line there. I want to extend this line all the way up here. Extend that one all the way up here. And then I can remove that. And then I'm just going to take my ruler, make a line straight across. I'll put that back in the center here. So there's how big that opening is going to be. And I want to curve around because I want my opening to have a rounded edge. Just like the other one. So I'm just going to curve around. Again, this does not need to be perfect. So just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of this inside here. All right. So I removed that. And as you can see, it is much larger than the other one. So when we stagger these, let me show you again. I'm going to put this on top of my photo background, just like that. Because that eventually is going to be glued to this. And then we're going to put a spacer, 4 spacers, one on top, one on the bottom, and one on each side. Right like this. So that our opening here is a little bit bigger. So that we create that sort of forced perspective, if you will. I hope this is making sense. If it doesn't, did I lose you? Maybe I lost some of you, or I'm about to. Look, you have to trust the process, okay? Trust the process. This is going to work out, and it's going to look awesome, I promise. So basically, that's how it's going to be, and then we're going to sculpt. We'll be able to sculpt in different layers right around. Okay, so at this point, if you need to make any modifications or additional cuts to get this into the shape that you want it to be, now's your opportunity to do so, because we're going to move on and start assembling. So if you find, like, you put your other piece up against the other piece here, and you find that, I don't know, there's a lot more room on one side than the other, you could trim the other side down to match a little bit more. Or even if you wanted a larger archway up at the top, you could do that. But you want to leave definitely leave yourself some room out here and up and down on the bottom, so that you have an area to sculpt in some details and interesting things like that. So the other thing that you will want, if you have on hand, is some scrap styrofoam. If you have it on hand. If you don't have scrap styrofoam, you can certainly use corrugated cardboard for this method. This piece of scrap styrofoam, I already measured it. So it's approximately 1 inch thick. Now, here's where things get a little bit more interesting. So for instance, okay, here's that one. This is the smaller opening of the panel that fits almost precisely around my photograph there. So this is going to be glued to the 2-inch piece of cardboard for the top and the bottom. So when we apply this, this needs to be glued in the very front. I hope this is making sense, because sometimes I feel like when I'm trying to explain things, I don't explain them very well, but I'm trying to be as clear and concise as possible. Let me turn it to this angle for you. So 2 inches wide, basically. So just like that. So in between these 2 pieces of cardboard where we cut out these openings, we need spacers so that we could glue them together, because we want to have that gap in between them. But we need the spacers to be able to fit so that these align with your bottom piece and of course your top piece too. All right. So because this is only 1 inch thick, I'm going to have to double them up. So if you don't have a piece of scrap styrofoam, you will need to cut sections of corrugated cardboard and glue them together until you have the right thickness for your spacers. Not a big deal, but I happen to have the styrofoam, so I'm going to use the styrofoam. I got my hot glue is heating up right now, so basically what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and cut off just a few pieces here. All right, I cut up a bunch of that styrofoam. My hot glue gun is ready to go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to squirt some hot glue and I'm just going to start gluing them together. Those are going to be my spacers, and they are approximately 2 inches wide, maybe a little bit less, but it's okay, that doesn't matter. Okay, I doubled those up, glued them together, and now on the piece of corrugated cardboard that has the larger opening, we're going to glue in our spacers. So I'm going to do 1 on each side, and then 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom. And like I said, these aren't exactly 2 inches. It's a little less than 2 inches. Get them close to the thickness of what your project ultimately will be. All right, those are glued in place. So now what I want to do is I want to attach it to the other piece that has the smaller opening. So I'm going to squirt in some hot glue on each one of these pieces. I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to line them up top to bottom and on the sides to make sure that they're even. So just like that, we'll give it a minute or so for the glue to set up. It feels a little bit wobbly, you know, because you could do this, but I'm not worried about it so much because we're going to attach the top and the bottom pieces of those corrugated cardboard. So these ones right here. And that's going to provide more stability. All right, this is cooled. So I'm going to attach the bottom piece first. So right around the edge. I'm going to sit the bottom, kind of line it up as best I can. Now I have a little gap here because my spacers weren't precisely 2 inches. I'm not worried about that. Like I said, if you don't have it exact, it's okay, because we're going to cover all this stuff when we sculpt out all of our details and make this thing really cool. So don't worry about that. But I mean, leave yourself enough of a gap so that you have the effect of that kind of that opening, that portal. So as you can see in here, you have that effect. Here's the larger opening, and then we got the smaller opening, and then again, let me just put this in the back, and then basically that's where that picture is going to go. Okay, Top and bottom pieces are in place. Give you another look at it from that angle. Time to attach the two side pieces. So same way, just attach your side pieces to both sides with your hot glue. All right, so all of those pieces are attached. And now this is a much more solid structure, but we're gonna make it even more solid in just a minute. I have a bunch of gaps in here. So I'm just gonna take the time and just reinforce those areas that I just glued on with some more hot glue, just right around. So any of the areas where I see some gaps where it didn't quite connect flush to the rest of these pieces of cardboard, is because I want them to be securely in place. All right, everything is glued and secured into place. There's the back, and then there's the front. Now, we don't want to leave these sections open because we need a platform on which to apply our clay and to sculpt in some stuff inside here. So what I have done is I took some more corrugated cardboard and I measured the opening from the inside here to the top of the other piece of cardboard opening here. So I measured that out, and then I cut that width in strips. So I have 3 strips of corrugated cardboard right here in front of me. And as you can see, they're curved because I manipulated those pieces just with my hands and bent them so that they're a little bit easier to put into place and kind of form around these openings. So the idea is to glue them right into place, just like that. So that's what you will do next. Now, the corrugated cardboard that I'm using it's a pretty thick corrugated cardboard from a packing box, a heavy-duty packing box. If your corrugated cardboard that you're using is not, a heavy-duty corrugated cardboard, what I suggest before you do this step is to take some crumbled up newspaper and pack it in to all of these areas here, and then glue in these strips. And the reason for that is because we're not going to strip mache this. We're going to glue all this stuff in place, and then we're going to go straight into laying on the clay. If this were a larger piece and it didn't have all of these openings, let's say this didn't have these openings at all, and it was just a big giant hollowed box, I would definitely stuff it with newspaper, and then I would strip mache the whole thing just to make sure that I have a really nice strong armature. But because there are large holes in here and we have these spacers holding up these areas, and my cardboard, I believe, is strong enough, I'm going to skip the step of strip machining and I can go right in laying on clay. But first things first, I don't feel the need to pack crumbled up newspaper inside here. I'm just going to go ahead with my hot glue, and I'm just going to start gluing in all of my pieces around those areas so that I have a platform on the sides of these openings in which to apply my clay. So just take one section at a time and just glue them into place. I haven't put any glue on the top edge quite yet. I want to get the bottom in place and get that cooled, and then I'll come in with some hot glue. All right. Now once you have your pieces glued in so that you're blocking in all of those openings, if you have any little gaps, what I suggest is taking a little bit of masking tape and just coming in with your masking tape and blocking those gaps. I like to do this, and the reason is all of these little areas here where you see the cut marks of the corrugation, If you put clay straight on that, you're going to have to put quite a bit of clay in there, because what happens is the clay will seep down inside of that corrugation, and if you don't have enough clay blocking all of that corrugation, those cut marks where you see the corrugation, when you go to actually start sculpting other things over, or especially painting, if you just left it like that without any other clay on top of it to block it, that corrugation is going to come through and it's going to look like corrugated cardboard. So just to help me out, I like to just take the masking tape and right around those edges. That way I don't have to worry about my clay not sticking properly and getting into those holes and those cracks. And then drying, and then I have to go back. Possibly I would have to go back and refill those areas with clay after everything has dried, which I don't want to do because that holds me up with time. So just a suggestion. It's not required, but it's a suggestion. Just take your masking tape and tape over all of those edges. All right, now that I have all of these edges covered in a little bit of masking tape, and I even did the back, although really the only areas that I needed to do that with are these cutouts in here. Now, we are not going to attach our back panel until basically we are done sculpting out this whole thing. And the reason for that is because if we attach this back panel and we start sculpting in here, laying on clay and sculpting out three-dimensional elements, it's highly likely that you're going to end up getting clay and paste and stuff onto your actual backdrop here of your photo, and it's going to end up getting ruined. So this we're going to actually attach last. Now remember in the very beginning how I told you to cut out 4 pieces of those panels, and one of them we have not used. So we are going to end up using this 4th panel here. And what we're going to do is, when it's all said and done, I just want to give you a preview of this so you know what's happening. So if I flip this over, this is going to be the front. If I flip this over, we got the back with the opening. And then we have our photo backdrop, and it will go in like this. This 4th piece will attach right over that. And we will hot glue it, and we will secure everything into place last. And then on this back panel here, we'll be able to apply some clay. Now the reason that I like to do this with a 4th piece instead of just applying clay directly to the back of the backdrop piece is because clay contains a lot of moisture, and of course we're using cardboard, which will absorb the moisture. I don't want this piece of cardboard to absorb so much moisture that it actually warps cardboard in any way and causes it to lift from the back of it a little bit. So I hope that makes sense. So by attaching it and then putting this another back panel on top of it and claying over this final back panel, there isn't going to be any moisture that's going to seep through to this. So that's the idea. Next step, get this out of the way. Next step is I'm going to take my paper mache clay, and I'm going to be using my Scarecrow Joe Studio clay for this portion of it. And if you don't know how to make clay and you're interested in learning, I do have some tutorials on the channel on how to make paper mache clay. So check out the playlist. There's an entire playlist on there on how to make homemade paper mache clay. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start laying on the clay. It's only going to be a thin layer because that's all I need. I'm going to start on the back, or the very, very back inner piece in there, and I'm going to work my way up so that all of these areas, everything in here is covered in a thin layer of clay. And I'm also going to clay over all 4 of the sides. I'm not going to do anything with the back. Now, because of this process, we are going to have to work in segments. So I'm going to apply this clay, this thin layer of clay, and then I'm going to allow it to dry for probably 24 hours, and it should be dry enough. It may not be completely 100% thoroughly dry, but it will be dry enough for me to handle it without disrupting any wet clay that's on there. And it will also be dry enough for me to go ahead and start sculpting in some three-dimensional forms onto this armature here that we're building. All right, so I got this far where I started on the inside with my clay, laying on a thin layer and making my way out. When you are doing this, the inner edge here, you do want to make sure that you put clay on that inner edge. Let me flip this over so you could see where there's some clay on the outside of that. So if I flip it this way, you could see there's clay on this inner edge. You do want to have clay on the inner edge. Now, if you find that your paper mache clay is a little dry and you want to smooth this out a little bit, and those of you who have watched a lot of my other paper mache tutorials, you know what I'm about to do. I'm taking some paste, paper mache paste, which is just a mixture of flour and water, and just cheap white flour and water, and I mix that to a thin pancake-like batter consistency. Dipping a paintbrush into that, I can go in here and I can apply more moisture into the clay, and by pressing it a little bit, I can smooth out that clay pretty easy, or get it a lot smoother than what I have it just, laying on there. So if you desire to have your clay a little smoother, you don't want to have it retain all of that texture, that's what I suggest that you do. That's the easiest way to smooth paper mache clay. And then after applying the moisture with the paste and the paintbrush, you could take any kind of a tool, sculpting tool, or a plastic butter knife, anything like that that you have around, and you can go right over that and you can smooth out this clay a little bit farther. I'm going to take my time and do it. I'm not overly concerned about it having a lot of texture, because my idea is I'm going to sculpt in some like three-dimensional trees, probably some other three-dimensional elements into this, and so the texture is fine for what I'm going for. All right, so it's been about 20 hours or so, and since I've layered on this clay, and it's not completely dry, but it's certainly dry enough for me to handle and continue on working and actually sculpting. So this is the fun part. This is just a little easel here. This is actually a music easel to hold the music on. But anyway, I'm going to use it for this demonstration just because it's easier. You do not need an easel of any sort. My big easel is upstairs. It has another big piece on it that's drying, so I have to use the little music easel. Not a big deal. Anyway, moving on. The paper mache clay that I'm going to be using to sculpt in all the details is going to be creative paper clay. And you can find this in arts and crafts stores and also online. A pound of it, depending on where you live, with tax is probably, I don't know, 16 bucks or so. Might be a little bit less. Sometimes they have coupons and stuff, but this stuff is really great. It's professional grade paper mache clay. You don't have to add water or anything to it. Most of you out there probably are very familiar with creative paper clay. In addition to the creative paper clay, I'm also going to be using some polymer clay. So I want to form some little jack-o'-lanterns out of polymer clay, bake them in the oven, and incorporate them into my wet paper mache clay. So the clay that I'll be using is just original Sculpey. So nothing fancy, not super Sculpey, not Primo Sculpey, nothing like that. Just original, the white Sculpey is going to be just fine for that. So You don't have to use that kind of stuff. You could use whatever clay, paper mache clay that you have on hand. But you could also incorporate other things into your piece, such as like, you know, some moss. So this is like some fake moss type stuff that I have on hand. You could even put lights, you know, you could incorporate some lights in there. I have some little tiny LED lights. I don't know if what I'm gonna be using exactly. This is just one of those things for me where I'm just gonna start sculpting and just kind of go with it, flow with it, see where it takes me. But as I'm sculpting and incorporating different things, I want you to keep that in mind when you create your own, because you could, you know, make things, press your clay into some molds that have maybe some skulls or whatever. And here I'm assuming that you're making a Halloween themed piece, but honestly, you can make any piece that you want, you know, doesn't have to be Halloween themed. It just happens to be what I am working on today. Remember back in the beginning, I told you to print out 2 copies of your photograph, one on the cardstock and one on just regular printer paper. The one for the regular printer paper is what I'm going to use just to kind of put back here. Doesn't have to like sit perfectly or anything, but I want that back there as I'm sculpting just to use as a reference. And what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm just going to tape this to the back of this. This way I still have the exact reference of what I'm going to be working on without actually attaching the one that I'm going to use and get stuff, clay and paste and all kinds of stuff all over it. All right. I just used some masking tape. I taped it in the back. So that's going to be in place while I'm sculpting. So it's going to be the perfect reference. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and because I'm using creative paper clay, and this is fairly dry, I'm going to spritz my dry clay where I'm going to start sculpting with some water. I'm going to start on the bottom here because, move this a little bit closer. As you can see in my photograph, it has this really cool stair, you know, like this, not stairs, but like a stone pathway that leads up to the haunted house up there. So I kind of want to carry that pathway 3-dimensionally down in here. So that's where I'm going to begin my sculpt, and I am going to have to turn this a little bit so that I can see what I'm doing. That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start right on the bottom where the stairs are and just start sculpting in. So I want these stairs to come pretty much all the way down. In the photo, they kind of angle. And the angle, it looks like they're going to come all the way down in here. So I think I'm going to just sort of try to replicate that just a little bit 3-dimensionally. So this is going to be the largest part of that stone pathway I'm going to create here. I want to make these a little bit larger because after I get them laid on there and smoothed out, I could go in and actually sculpt the cobblestones in there. Just want to come up a little bit up here. Let me tilt this so you can see. with that down. I know the lighting isn't all that great, but right now I'm just putting in that clay. And I want to carry that clay all the way up to the edge. All right, as you can see, I changed it a little bit. I ended up kind of curving my pathway down here. I built up a little bit of a ledge. So let me just show you that. So there's a little bit of a ledge. Turn it that way so you could see a couple of different little ledges here. This one is wider, sticks out, protrudes more than this next one. And then this one's pretty much, I didn't build it up too much more or out any farther than what it is against this piece here. And I brought it all the way back here. So before this starts to dry, I want to go in and I have just this little sculpting tool here. And I'm going to just start pressing in, trying to give you guys an angle. I'm looking at the camera. I'm trying to give you guys an angle on how that, so you could see what I'm doing a little bit better, but it's kind of hard to see. I understand that. I'm just pressing in cobblestones. I don't want them to be super uniform or anything like that. And I want them to be different sizes. So there's no real pattern. All right, I'm getting there. I was going back and forth trying to find the correct tool for this. This paper mache clay is different texture than the paper mache clay that I make. So sometimes it takes a little getting used to for me. But I think I finally found a good tool to kind of just scratch in these stone pathway without tearing up a bunch of the clay. So I'm going to keep doing this. This is pretty tedious. I gotta be honest with you, I was starting to get kind of frustrated. But then I reminded myself that this is fun. I actually like making this kind of stuff. So take your time, you know. Art, a lot of times, for me anyway, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So when you're doing these things, take your time, have fun with it. If you're not having fun, then what's the point? I mean, honestly, you gotta have fun. You gotta enjoy the process. Some of it's tedious, like this is pretty tedious, putting in these stones here, but I know that once I get past this point, I get all these cobblestones in there, I'm gonna start putting in some trees, and that's when it's gonna get a lot more fun for me. I love sculpting trees, tree bark, tree limbs, that kind of stuff. All right, so I had to stop this project, and so this, what I have on here, has dried about 24 hours or so. So this paper mache clay on here is completely dry, but I just wanted to give you a look at something. In the drying process, I developed some cracks here. And if you do develop some cracks, and this will happen more than likely if you're using creative paper clay, or even any other regular clay. It doesn't tend to happen so much when I use my Scarecrow Joe Studio clay, but if I use a creative paper clay and I apply water onto it to smooth it out, in the drying process it does tend to crack. That's not a big deal, and I'll show you how you can repair that to make that more cohesive and just fill in those cracks, and it'll pretty much look like nothing happened. But here's the side here of where I sculpted in the tree texture. So I'm going to try to turn it in different angles here so you could see the three-dimensional quality of this. So that way, if I turn it straight, so I have the tree coming up on the side there, and it does carry on up onto the ceiling of the sculpture, this curve here, the arch. So you saw me in the last clip applying the clay, and after I applied the clay, I smoothed it out with a little bit of water. I didn't get very many cracks. I got a few small cracks here and there. I'm actually not concerned about that, and I'm not going to try to fill in those cracks. It's just going to remain in there as part of the texture of the tree. But after I smoothed everything over, I just went in with a little sculpting tool and I scratched in some lines to resemble the tree bark texture, and also some like little knots. That's what you see here and here. So that's what I accomplished there. But I'll show you momentarily how to fix some cracks. But before I do that, I just want to move on quickly here and start making my little jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins that I do want to incorporate into some of the wet clay. So because I'm using the oven bake Sculpey original clay, I want to get these formed and baked in the oven so that when I continue on sculpting, the clay will still be wet and I could press in the baked cured Sculpey pumpkins into the wet clay. So here I have one of them that's already formed. It's pretty easy. I mean, pumpkins, I'm probably going to do a few of them in different sizes to kind of put in there. And then I'm also going to do maybe at least one. I think I'm going to do at least one tombstone. The other thing that I'm going to incorporate that I found in my box of miscellaneous stuff is this is just a little plastic lamp post. But in the background, these lights here, these are like, pathway lights. So I thought it might be a little interesting if I had one that's three-dimensional and kind of incorporate maybe towards the front here. And I don't know, I haven't decided if I'm going to cut this down or just leave it as a taller lamppost. So this is also something that I can incorporate in there. So there are lots of things that you could incorporate into your piece. But anyway, just to show you quickly how I just make pumpkins, they're pretty easy. Obviously, you're going to start off with a round sphere. And I like to just kind of press them down just a little bit so it has a little bit of a flatter surface area on the bottom. And then just with the little sculpting tool, first thing that I like to do is I'll make the marks. I'll make 4 marks, pretty much going all the way around the pumpkin form. So one across and then another one across. This is just a very simplified way to do this. And then in between, so now I have these 4 areas here that I've created. I could go in and just scratch in some other little lines. So pretty easy. Just like that. And then, of course, you know, this one here has a little, I scratched in a little jack-o'-lantern face. And I put a little stem on them. Now, if you're working with Sculpey clay, to make sure, if you're going to put a stem, to make sure that the stem is actually going to adhere and bake into your existing clay that you have here, what I do is I form a little indentation into the center where I'm going to put the stem, so something like that. And then pretty easy, just take a little bit of the clay, I roll it, and I just stick it in there, and I kind of press it down a little bit. And then, you know, if you wanted to put a little texture into the stem, you can certainly scratch in a little texture into your stem. I'm using sculpting tools, but for a lot of this stuff, you could use, you could just use toothpicks or whatever you have on hand that you can find to help you out to sculpt. So there I have two. Off camera, I'm going to carry on, and I'm going to make a few more just to incorporate into my piece. Real quick, I want to show you how to make a simple tombstone out of polymer clay. And again, I'm using original Sculpey polymer clay. You can use whatever polymer clay that you want, but this is what I'm using, original Sculpey for this. Nothing fancy. I have a ball of the clay, and this is going to be way too much for the size that I'm going to make, but I also have this little, just a little clay press. You can use anything that'll do the job. And I want to kind of smash that ball down. So this is a pretty good thickness right here. When you're doing tombstones, you want to have a decent amount of thickness on them. So I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to do a small one, so pretty basic. With a little sculpting tool, I'm just going to basically start scratching in my design. I think I want to have a little arch on the top and have it kind of come over, you know, something like that. Nothing too fancy, but nothing like plain either. And then I'm just going to simply bring this down something like that. This is a good size of the tombstone that I'm going to use for kind of the front area of my piece. So I have my shape cut out there, or pressed in, and with my blade I'm going to go in and just cut around and cut out my tombstone. So I have that cut out, and I want to kind of I want to smooth the edges so that they don't look so evenly cut, because I want this to be an aged looking tombstone, so I don't want it to look brand new. So I'm just going to go ahead and on the edges smoothen out just a little bit so I don't have these blunt sharp edges. Now, to make this a little bit more interesting, I can go in and right around the edge, I could just sort of press in like a little border. So I'm going to press in a little border just around the edges. Give it a little bit more interest. I'll come in and I'll press in a border right up here. And then, you know, you could press in a name of a person on the tombstone. I'm going to be super original, and I'm just going to put RIP in there. So that's basic. That is a very basic and simple tombstone. But to give it even more interest, I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to scratch in some cracks. Just press in some cracks here and there. And then one of the other things that I want to do, I want to give it some texture. You could use bits of aluminum foil, work really good for pressing in texture. So I'm just going to gently, lightly roll my ball of aluminum foil on the sides, the top, and the face of this. I don't know why I did the bottom. No one's going to see that. And I'm doing the back and no one's going to see that. But just to give you an idea. And then by doing that, I kind of smudged up my larger cracks. So I'm just going to go in here and redefine my larger cracks. All right, while I am waiting for my little polymer clay pieces to cool, I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix these cracks that have developed into that dry paper clay there. I'm just going to take a little bit of the creative paper clay, and this is very, very simple. And I'm just going to go ahead and press pretty firmly right down over all of those cracks. I'm just pressing in a little bit more of that clay. And you want to make sure that when you are pressing in the clay, you know, if you have, and of course I have pressed in some texture. So after I'm done filling in these cracks, I'm going to go in and redefine that texture that I've lost by filling in all of these cracks. So pretty simple, not a big deal. And because it's just a very thin amount of this clay that I'm filling these cracks with, this will dry in no time. All right, so here are all my little jack-o'-lanterns. So some are jack-o'-lanterns because I put in some little faces on a couple of them. The rest of them are just pumpkins. I didn't put any faces or anything on them. Here's my tombstone. And then I made a little tiny owl. It's not a very good one, but it looks like an owl, and it'll work, I think. It may not even end up in my piece. I'm not sure yet, but here's my tiny little owl. And originally I was going to go ahead and incorporate these polymer clay pieces into the wet paper clay. And then I had some second thoughts on that because there's going to be a lot of painting involved. And if I start attaching these separate elements into the rest of it, it's going to be a lot more difficult to paint each of these little separate elements, make them look great, and also everything else on that I'm going to put on here. And especially things like if I attach the tombstone, because this is where I'm pretty much going to attach that tombstone right back in here. It's going to be very, very difficult once I attach that to paint it. So I'm going to paint all of these things before attaching them. So I'm going to have to use some super glue, which is not a big deal. So anyway, for now, I'm going to set all of these little things aside and then get back to sculpting out around this frame here. All right, I'm going to carry on this side of the inside of the frame here, just like I did on this side by building up some clay and sculpting in some trees. So with my spray bottle, I just want to wet the surface, dampen the surface of the existing clay that I have on there. And then I have to keep in mind that I'm going to put that tombstone in there. So with that tombstone in mind, tombstone's going to be like right there. So I don't want to block that area or put anything in there at the moment. In order to have a place for my tombstone. So just like I did on the other side, I'm just going to go in and form some trees, some spooky little trees. So I go a little thicker on the bottom. Obviously, trees tend to be thicker on the bottoms. And then as I work my way up, the branches will get progressively smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm going to curve them a little bit, curve some of these branches, just make them look really interesting. And one of them here, I'm just bringing over just the tip of it onto the edge here. So I'm going to continue on sculpting this out, basically laying in tree branches, things like that. All right, so as you can see, I have finished up the sculpt on this piece here, and unfortunately, all of the additional footage of me sculpting was all blurry. I have no idea why. Anyway, I'm not a camera person. I'm an artist. I do my best. So I just wanted to give you a look real quick on what I have accomplished. On the sides, I put in some more like tree vines, and then I created out of polymer clay, the Sculpey original polymer clay. I formed some more little jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkin forms. These ones that are on the side, and they're on both sides here, these ones are flat on the back, so they're not completely round, they're flat on the back. And unlike the other round ones that I formed, I did end up pressing them into some of this wet clay, just because these areas are not going to be so busy for me to paint, so that'll be fine. And then in here, I finished up and I put in some more details with the tree branches and tree vines. And then right up here at the top, I did sculpt out a flat little silhouette of a bat, and I did insert that into this wet clay up here, and he's just going to be pretty much solid black and maybe some little shading of some grays in there. So that one's attached already too. As far as everything else is concerned, you see that over here. These are the rest of my little things that I'm going to incorporate into this piece. I have started painting those off camera, and those are drying. They're going to get some additional paint onto those. But as far as the rest of this is concerned, it's time to start painting. And I know this is another very long video, but you know, I figure as much details as I can give you, the better off. So for the painting portion of this, I'm going to go ahead and remove my little reference for my backdrop. But on this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint maybe a little bit of a wash. So I'm going to water down a little bit of just black matte acrylic paint. So in a cup I have just some basic flat black acrylic craft paint. I'm not using my normal paint and primer mix on this. And I watered it down a little bit. I think I need to add some more water. The reason that I am doing a black watered down sort of a wash for the base coat is I don't want it like pure like black, dark black. I do want to have that dark sort of just that darkness in that background, but not pure black, because I am going to put in some purples, some dark blues in there to kind of resemble the actual background of the photo. So as I'm putting on this paint, this wash, I'm just going in with a shop towel and wiping off a bunch of it too. And all of this texture in here, so in those recessed areas of all the texture of these tree limbs, by wiping off the black paint, the recessed areas will remain dark, they'll remain black, and then I could paint over some browns and different colors on those. So that's what I'm going to do off camera. I'm going to continue on doing this and putting in all of this black wash on here. All right, so I have that wash of black paint on there, and this is how it looks now. Give you a look at the insides. So I wiped off a bunch of it off of like the tree branches. I did wipe off a lot of it from the background, but the background is going to be a little bit darker. And here's one of the sides. And this is the other side. And my little bat silhouette that I had hanging up there that I originally inserted into that wet clay. When I was painting, it came off, so I'll have to reattach that with some super glue after I'm done painting here. But I want to carry on now with some purple paint over this black wash in all of these areas, the recessed areas in between all of these tree branches and tree limbs. So I'm going to knock off a bunch of the paint. And I just kind of want to see if that's going to be too dark. I may have to lighten it because, of course, you know, when you're applying acrylic paint, when it dries, it does dry a little bit darker, in my opinion anyway. All right, so I reattached, just retaped my little photograph reference back into that section there, just so that now I can have that reference back in there while I'm continuing to paint. But this is what it looks like so far. So I did the sides as well and the top. I didn't paint the bottom yet. The bottom's probably just I'm just gonna paint it a flat black, as well as after when I'm done with the entire piece here and I reattach and I attach the back piece. I'll paint that after it's clayed over. I'll paint that flat black as well. But now I want to bring in some of this pinkish coloration into a little bit into some of these areas in here. And the color that I'm using is an amethyst color. So I think it's going to be pretty close. I'm not going to bring in any of this blue coloration into the piece up here or in here. I want to let this remain just that kind of a focal point in the background there. So I'm going to use a smaller in diameter paintbrush with the amethyst paint, and I really just want to bring some of that in just a little bit. I might need to brighten it up a little bit more, going over this purple paint. It might end up being still kind of dark, but I do just want to bring in a little bit of that lighter paint in there, just so it looks a little bit more cohesive. Put another light on this, so maybe you could see this a little bit better. But I went in with that amethyst colored paint, and I really concentrated on like the insides of the frame here and the top, because the moon is going to be, it's pretty bright full moon, and the progression of the color from this bluish color goes out to that purple and amethyst. So I carried the amethyst dry brush over the purple paint that I put in there, and I carried that all the way up and a little bit up into these areas up here, just a little bit. So it kind of looks like it's radiating out. Give you a look at this side here, where you can see a little bit more of the amethyst colored paint. So that really brightens that up, and it really blends in with that background piece. So that's what I was going for. So that's pretty much done in the background here. I'm not going to go in with any more purple paint to touch up any of the background pieces or areas on the front here. I want it to remain dark like that. But I am going to go in now with some more of the black paint, and I'm going to start dry brushing on a little bit more of the black paint especially down in the lower areas. I just want to darken the trees, especially in the lower areas. I want to darken them up just a little bit, and then as they go up and the moonlight is kind of shining on them, they'll be lighter. So I'm going to do that with pretty much all of them. I'm going to darken all of these areas and progressively just get a little bit lighter. All right. I just want to give you a quick look at my progress here. I did go in and I added a little bit more of that amethyst purplish color. Brought it up a little bit more, just kind of break up all of that dark purple. And then I also went in and I painted in and darkened up with some black acrylic paint on all of these trees so that they kind of match and look very similar to the trees in the picture, the background photo there. A couple other things that I did off camera was I finished up the tombstone and I attached it. I just dry brushed over some gray paint onto the black tombstone, and then I went in after that dry brush gray paint was dry and I darkened up the key lettering on there. And then I also attached a few little pieces of moss onto that tombstone, and then my little street post, I did decide to put that in there. I think it looks pretty good. And so it was plastic little windows for the street lamp post there. So I just went in with some bright yellow paint and just painted those plastic pieces for the windows. And then I super glued that into place too. This is pretty much done. I also went in on the sides here and I darkened in all of the vines on both sides of the piece. So I still need to paint the pumpkins on both sides, and I think I'm going to do on the sides here, I'm going to put in some dark, like a olive colored green acrylic paint onto these vines to kind of bring them out and make them pop a little bit more over this black paint here. And then as far as this cobblestone pathway, I'm not going to color it in a purple coloration like the pathway that's in the background photo. I'm going to leave it as is. I don't want it necessarily to blend completely into that pathway in the photo. So I want it to stand out a little bit more. And I like the way it looks. It looks like old cobblestone. So I'm going to carry on off camera, finish this piece up, attach the back of it. And then I'll give you my final thoughts on this piece and show you what it looks like. Well, that's going to be a wrap on this tutorial. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Just before I let you go on this one, I do want to mention that in those photos in that little video clip of this sitting actually on top of my bookshelf, in the little background there, I have these tiny little LED lights that I got from Amazon, and they work really well. They're small enough to insert them, like I inserted one behind the tombstone there, and I inserted one right behind this lamp post. I turn them on. These have multiple colors, so they light up with different colors simultaneously. So if you're interested in adding some little lights or anything like that to your piece, this is a really, really good option. Other than that, you can get like a little spotlight and maybe hang it from the top of your bookshelf, or sit it kind of on the bottom here and it'll shine up. But I think this is going to be a great addition to my bookshelf for the Halloween season, and I hope that you make one that's just as great or even better. I have many, many more tutorials coming your way, but like I said, that's a wrap on this one. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.